4 decades ago, Western executives obsessed over a single name: China. They saw a market so vast it promised growth without end, a final frontier for the world's most powerful corporations. Looking at Beijing in the early 1980s, the potential seemed limitless because the starting point was so low. The streets were filled with a sea of identical bicycles. Almost no one owned a car, modern refrigerators were rare, and personal computers were a luxury reserved for the elite. This stood in sharp contrast to the United States and Europe. By the 1990s, Western markets were saturated. Sales charts for cars and appliances had gone flat. Everyone who needed a washing machine already had one, and competition had become a zero-sum game. Corporate boards began doing CEO math. They calculated that selling a single toothbrush to just 10% of China's 1.2 billion people would generate wealth beyond imagination. Selling cars to 1% would make a CEO a legend. These executives believed they were entering the greatest gold mine in history. In reality, they were entering an industrial academy, where every piece of equipment they brought served as a textbook for a new generation of competitors to study. China held a unique leverage over these companies: the power of the gatekeeper. To access those billion customers, foreign firms were legally prohibited from operating independently. The joint venture law required forming a 50-50 partnership with a Chinese state enterprise. This meant transferring more than money. Western firms had to share technical drawings, production secrets, and source code, literally teaching their partners how to replicate the entire process. Volkswagen was the first to take the gamble in 1984. They brought German engineering to Shanghai, modernizing factories with advanced welding robots and precision presses. While VW collected billions in profit, their Chinese partners meticulously documented the logistics of the supply chain and the exact tolerances required for mass production. Masterclassing these foundational skills, how to manage thousands of parts and maintain quality at scale, gave Chinese firms a shortcut. Once they mastered the complex logic of the assembly line, they realized they didn't need to catch up on gas engines. They took that perfected manufacturing machine and pointed it directly at electric motors and batteries. Obsessed with short-term quarterly earnings that kept shareholders happy, Western leaders traded their long-term technological edge for a few years of high-margin sales. This extraction model soon scaled from consumer cars to the very infrastructure of the nation, specifically the push for high-speed rail. Companies like Siemens and Kawasaki saw a once-in-a-century contract, the chance to build the world's largest rail network. To get the deal, they accepted the same terms, handing over the blueprints for their engines and signaling systems. The state launched a policy officially called digestion and re-innovation. This involved buying foreign hardware, stripping it down to the molecular level, and analyzing the metallurgy of every bolt. They treated German and Japanese trains like biological specimens, absorbing their nutrients to strengthen their own engineering. By 2010, China debuted the Hexi Hao. It was 30% cheaper than foreign models, and so technologically similar that Kawasaki engineers found their own design errors mirrored in the Chinese version. Having digested the tech, China stopped buying from the West and began exporting its own trains globally. This joint venture system functioned as a state-sponsored vacuum, pulling a century of global engineering expertise into domestic hands in a single decade. But when a company held a technology so vital they refused to share it, the tactics shifted from legal contracts to the shadows. American Superconductor produced the proprietary software that controlled wind turbines. Their Chinese partner, Sinovel, wanted the code but couldn't buy it. Instead, they bribed a single employee to download the source code, effectively ending their need to pay for the American product overnight. The most extreme case hit the Canadian giant, Nortel. For years, hackers had total access to the CEO's emails, technical R&D, and internal pricing. They saw every package Nortel offered on global contracts before they were even submitted. A local competitor in Shenzhen, named Huawei, began releasing hardware that was virtually identical to Nortel's, but significantly cheaper. Huawei used this intelligence to systematically underbid Nortel globally, eventually pushing the Canadian titan into total bankruptcy by 2009. By the time Western governments realized the scale of the infiltration, the monopolies they had spent decades building were being hollowed out by rivals using their own stolen data. In 2015, the Made in China 2025 plan signaled the end of the copycat era. The goal was no longer to learn from the West, but to replace it in 10 key sectors, from robotics to aerospace. The culture of rapid iteration, originally used for knockoff phones, matured into world-leading innovation. DJI now controls 70% of the global drone market, and the algorithms behind TikTok have redefined how the entire world consumes information. The West has responded with a silicon wall, led by the US and the Netherlands. They are blocking China from buying ASML lithography machines, the only tools capable of printing the microscopic transistors needed for high-end AI and military hardware. However, the machine's greatest vulnerability is the people inside it. The 996 work culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, has created a generation of exhausted workers who are starting to opt out of the system entirely. This has led to the lying flat movement, where young people refuse to marry, buy homes, or compete in the labor market. Combined with a shrinking population, the country is facing a shortage of the very human energy that built its economy. The pursuit of short-term profit built a competitor that now dominates the global stage. But as young workers withdraw and the population begins to contract, the very machine the West helped build is now running out of the human fuel it needs to keep moving.